On today's show, I've got the Cleveland Cavaliers in the second tier amongst Eastern Conference teams. Bleacher Report's Greg Swartz. He might disagree. We're going to talk through it on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Locked On Cavs, your first listen every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Make sure you drop us a 5-star rating, leave a nice review, and if you're watching on YouTube as well, make sure you click that thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button too, and the notification bell so you get the latest Locked On Cavs content as soon as it's ready. A proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, and now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hi again, everybody. I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. Special guest with me today is we've got Greg Swartz. You know him from Bleacher Report. He's been covering the Cavaliers and really the NBA at large at Bleacher Report for like 15 years. So if you don't know Greg by now, you should know Greg. Make sure you go check out all his stuff. It gets sent to your phone on the Bleacher Report app all the time. So you should know who Greg is by now. But we're going to talk through some NBA tiers. The season is approaching, and I think now is really a good time to just take a gauge as far as where we believe the Cavs sit in the Eastern Conference. We'll get to what Greg thinks. I mentioned in the cold open, I think the Cavs are a second-tier Eastern Conference team. But Greg, I know the one place as we get started that we're going to agree is that the Boston Celtics really should be considered to be in a tier of their own at the top of this conference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be disrespectful not to put them there. I mean, not only were they, NBA champions, number one offense in NBA history, they won the Eastern Conference by 14 games.
It's just so, we don't think about that because it was so big. But it's so jarring to go back if you want to pull up like Basketball Reference or whatever and look at last year's standings and to see the Celtics win, I believe, 64 games, right? And then New York finished second at like 50 and 32. Like that is such a wild gap that you just don't see in the NBA today.
Yeah, and so I thought, well, maybe, because Kristaps Porzingis is going to miss the beginning of the season, like maybe that'll put a little dent in them. The Celtics went 21-4. Last year without Kristaps Porzingis. So if you thought maybe they'd take a step back, plugging Al Horford in, nope, they went 21-4 without, truly one of the best two-way big men in the NBA. So no, they're going to be just fine while they wait for him to come back.
So can I make the case because, and I think this is interesting, and I'm not going to make the case for another team to be in tier one. I think that's laughable to try and do so. It's disingenuous. I'm not going to do that. But the Cavs are in the same group as the Boston Celtics for the NBA Cup, basically the artist formerly known in its 1 year previously of existence as the in-season tournament. They're in the same group as the Celtics. And I think that that's actually a really good thing for the Cavs. And I can make that case because I think the Celtics, for as good as they're going to be at the end of the year, and as good as I expect them to be in the playoffs, and as I expect them to win the Eastern Conference again, I think the Cavs are in a great spot because look at what they have going into this season. You talk about a team that played until the middle of June, which the Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks did by virtue of being in the finals. 3 of Boston's 4 or 5 most important players in Jason Tatum, Drew Holiday, and Derek White played in the Olympics for Team USA. So their summer vacation didn't start till a couple of weeks ago. So you're looking at like a 6-week summer break for those guys. Now, Jaylen Brown's going to come into the year all angry, of course, because he was not on that Team USA with those 3 other guys. And then you mentioned Kristaps Porzingis, who we don't know when we're going to see him again. If my bet is that he will play for the Celtics in 2025, but not in 2024. So I actually think because of that, the Cavs could be in a great spot early on to have like a better start than the Celtics. For as wild as that sound, I think they're in a decent spot here.
I'll agree with that, and I'll say another big factor for that tournament is why do the players care about this? Money. Like they get $500,000, and the Celtics' 2 best players have signed the 2 biggest contracts in the history of the NBA already. Like, Jason Tatum just signed a $300 million extension. Does he really care about another $500,000? Maybe he does. Jaylen Brown is going to be making $60 million at the end of his deal. Porzingis, Drew Holiday, Derek White, like all these guys have made hundreds of millions of dollars. Al Horford, another guy you could add in there. So how motivated are they going to be to try to win that? And last year they didn't win it either. I picked them to win it when we did our season preview for that, and they didn't. So yeah, I agree with you on that side.
Now, let me ask you this before we move on to the second tier, in which I do have the Cavaliers. Are the Celtics alone in tier 1? If you just, because today we're specifically focusing on the Eastern Conference, but if you put together the entire NBA, are the Celtics still alone in that first tier, or do you have a team out west that's not maybe equal to them, but is at least worthy of comparison?
I would hesitantly put the Oklahoma City Thunder right up there. And
interesting.
Part of me wants to say Denver, but I think they got a little worse. Dallas, I think, is obviously very good, but to me, they're still not the best team in the West, even though they ended up in the conference or in the finals last year. I would say OKC, to me, if I was betting on what team's going to finish second and wins, I think it would be Boston 1, OKC second, and that's a team that won 57 games last year and got a lot better this offseason. So the Thunder are the only other team that I would consider, but I still think Boston is far and away the best team in the NBA.
So it's a difficult thing for me. It's a difficult conversation because I like OKC a lot. I agree with you. I think they got a lot better this offseason. But it's hard for me to say, okay, this is a clear-cut championship favorite when you're talking about a team that didn't make the conference finals last year. And I get OKC is very young. They are immensely talented. There's no question about that. But they also won the most games out west and didn't make it out of the second round. So that is the thing I think that is holding me back from having them in that top tier alongside Boston. But I also can't be like, oh, well, because of all those things, they're not actually a championship contender and Boston's the only one. So it's kind of a little bit of a conundrum, if you will, for me to decide if I want to have Boston alone. But clearly they are alone in the Eastern Conference. So I mentioned at the top of the show, I've got the Cavs in the second tier in the Eastern Conference. I don't believe that they are necessarily a championship contender. I think that a lot of things have to go their way for them to win the Eastern Conference. But I also feel that way about every team in the East that's not Boston. And I don't know that there's a giant difference between the rest of the teams that I have in this second tier, which would be New York, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. I don't know that there's a big gap between 2 and 5 there. And the Cavs, I think the Cavs are probably 4 or 5 in that group, but it was hard for me to not include them there.
So your list looks exactly like mine, except I didn't include them there. That was the only difference. So I call this like the championship or bust. Like that is the goal for these teams. Like if the Cavs, I don't think the Cavs should go into the season saying if we don't win the championship, it's a bad season. I don't think they should feel that way. I think if you make
That's
a conference
fair.
finals, if you make a conference finals, I still think that could be considered a good year. If you're the Philadelphia 76ers and you just went out and you paid $219 million for Paul George, and he is going to get significantly worse every year because he's 34 years old, and you have Joel Embiid, who is in his 30s, and he's going to probably sign another massive extension here pretty soon. The clock is ticking on them. That's a championship or bust franchise. I think New York, with all the pieces they've put around, I think their goal should be championship, and Milwaukee, because they're besides Damian Lillard, that's a core that has won a championship. Giannis is now about to turn 30 years old, and the rest of that roster is really old. I mean, Damian Lillard's 34, Chris Middleton's 32. He had surgery on both ankles. Like that's a team that needs to win. Plus, Brook Lopez is a guy who's going into his free agency. So I put those three teams kind of like we have to win a title or it's a bad season. And I think if they reach their peak, they are talented enough to win a championship. Now, obviously, a lot of health things need to go right for a lot of those teams. One team, especially the New York Knicks, you look at what a difference OG Anunoby made. They bring him back on a new New Year max contract. 20-3 with him last year, 30-29 without him. They were basically a 500 team when Anunoby did. It's a crazy difference.
It's nuts. It's a wild split.
He's never made an all-star team, but he makes such a big difference. The one thing about them, though, is they're going to have to shift his position. Because if you have Julius Randle back, who's going to play the 4, didn't play a minute at 5 last year, Mitchell Robinson's going to be your starting 5. You lost Isaiah Hartenstein. That's a team that now Josh Hart's going to have to come off the bench. I don't know. It's going to be a different look of a Knicks team. And obviously they have to have Anunoby healthy, but I think that's a championship team. So for them, they're probably a tier above the Cavs. But yeah, I would have Philly, Milwaukee, and New York in a tier just slightly above Cleveland.
So I'm going to push back on New York, and I'm going to do that coming up next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. Right now, life can get really busy for you. It's been getting really busy for me, and that means you might be able to, forget about some things that are priorities. But as this show is brought to you by BetterHelp, I'm here to remind you that therapy can be something that absolutely can be a big help. It can be a big boost to your life. Like maybe right now, you're not making time to learn new things as an adult. You don't necessarily have that passion for knowledge that you once had. Therapy can be something that helps you get back to that as you can start to make time to better yourself. And if you are thinking about starting therapy, I do think that can be a very good idea for a lot of people that are in need of it, but give BetterHelp a try because it is entirely online. It is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. I think all three of those things are very important. If you're super busy like I am, maybe you cannot just go at random times. You need to be able to have a set schedule of when you can get therapy, or maybe you're the opposite. Maybe one week it's, hey, I'm available Tuesday at 11 a.m. and the next week, I'm not available until Thursday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. BetterHelp is convenient and flexible where they can get that done. Plus, I think a very important thing that BetterHelp does is that you will match with a licensed therapist, but then you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge because it can be difficult to find that therapist that is the right match for you, but BetterHelp solves that problem and it's pain-free. So rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today for 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA, LOCKEDON for 10% off your first month today. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every single day. So, Greg, you had the Knicks in Tier 2, the Cavs in Tier 3, and I don't think that those situations are all that different. Now, I understand that the Knicks might have a little bit more talent on paper. I think that their roster probably fits a little bit better on paper. And I think we would probably agree that all the teams we've talked about so far, outside of Boston, are teams that are flawed. It's not like we're talking about the 73-9 Golden State Warriors who blew a 3-1 lead in the finals. We're talking about mortal NBA teams. But my pushback with the Knicks in particular, and I don't know that this rings true for Milwaukee and Philadelphia as much, but I don't think for the Knicks it's an unsuccessful season if they don't win a championship. I think you could make that case for Milwaukee because of the age of their roster, because of just where they're at on their timeline, because they've already won a title. I think you can make that case for Philadelphia because of how old Joel Embiid is, how much money they spent on Paul George, and really just everything Daryl Morey has done since taking over there. So I get those two. But New York is the one that I look at, and New York is talented enough to do it, just the same way I view the Cavs are talented enough to go on a pretty deep playoff run. The Knicks, I do believe, would need a lot of things to shake their way. They're not flawless. And I also can't say, if that team makes the conference finals, which they have not yet done, and you can say the same thing about Philadelphia. I can't say, okay, if you make the conference finals, New York, that's still a failure. I can't get there. The only team that I think I can really firmly get there with in this group is Milwaukee. And even then, you're talking about a team that has not won a playoff series in the last 2 years.
Yeah. I think Milwaukee's obviously had terrible injury history the last couple of years, as has
right.
a lot of teams on this list.
Well, all these teams have. I mean, if
Yes.
you look at this tier, and I know you had the Cavs the tier below, and we'll get to why coming up in a second, but last year the playoff run for the Knicks, they don't have Julius Randle for the entirety of it. Jalen Brunson breaks his thumb or wrist or whatever it was in Game 7 in the second round against the Pacers. Josh Hart is beat up. Everybody, Anunoby's in and out of the lineup. He's a shell of himself when he's on the floor. You get to Philly, Joel Embiid has not had a healthy playoff run. Milwaukee hasn't had Giannis. And then you look at it this season, well, Chris Middleton's coming off of surgery to not one, but both of his ankles. So it's injury questions, I think, are prevalent with all of these teams.
Absolutely. I think Philadelphia is a team that could win 55 to 60 regular season games. And I just don't believe in them to be healthy in the playoffs. I think either Paul George is going to be out, or Joel Embiid is going to be out, or he's going to be like 50%, like we've seen him, when he tries to come back from a major knee issue, which we've seen him do in the past. And that's not fair to Tyrese Maxey. He's going to do the best he can, and I feel like they did a good job of filling out that roster. But yeah, if those guys aren't healthy, they don't have a shot. I think the one thing the Cavs have over those teams is the Cavs have shown the ability, when they're missing key players, they can still win basketball games. And we haven't seen that from Philadelphia. We haven't seen that from New York. And I think one thing that's interesting is, going into last year, because a lot of Cavs fans are kind of frustrated because they didn't improve the roster that much. And, on paper, we're like the fourth, the fifth best team. Last year, going into the season, the Indiana Pacers over-under win total was set at 38. We weren't expecting a lot from the Pacers last year. And they ended up as one of the final four teams in the NBA. And that was because of who they played, and there was injuries. But just being the healthiest team at the end says a lot. And I think if you look on paper, are the Cavs as good as Philadelphia, New York, Milwaukee? No, I don't think they are. But I trust in the Cavs core to be healthy at the end, like I don't believe in those other ones. So if we're just talking talent and expectations, I'm going to put those other teams above Cleveland. But when you get to April and May and June, I have a lot more confidence that the Cavs are going to be healthy than some of those top teams in the East.
Well, and I think that's sort of, in for lack of a better way to say this, part of, a double-edged sword with the Cavs, the way the roster is built, because, they don't necessarily have all their talent spread out positionally as you would like in an ideal world, right? Like they've got two guys, I think, that are both centers that are all-star caliber. They've got two ball-dominant guards who are a little undersized, one of whom, in Darius Garland, I believe is an all-star caliber guy. The other in Donovan Mitchell, who is an all-NBA caliber guy. That makes it not always great, but it also lessens the blow when one of them is hurt, especially if it's not Mitchell in particular. But really, if one of the other ones are hurt, the slack is, I think, easier to be picked up in a way that Milwaukee can't. Part of it is, there's no replacing Giannis, and he's been injured the last two postseasons. But they also don't have a great answer when Chris Middleton's injured. They don't have a great answer when Brook Lopez, who will, I believe, be turning 38 during this season, is injured. Philadelphia, there's no replacing Joel Embiid. That guy's a former MVP, but they just don't have the rest of the roster suited to be successful when those guys aren't on the floor. And I do think that is an advantage the Cavs have really over everyone other than Boston in the Eastern Conference. Like if you had to remove stars from every team, I would feel better about the Cavs than I think every team that is not the Boston Celtics in the East.
I would agree. Let's talk about the Cavs.
Let's do it. Let's talk about the Cavs.
Yeah, so I have the Cavs at the very top of the next tier. And this is like the teams that, are probably going to be in the playoffs and are probably going to win a playoff round or could win multiple playoff rounds. In this tier, I've got the Cavs at the top. The Orlando Magic are in this tier, the Indiana Pacers, and the Miami Heat. And that's it because, boy, the rest of the East is not good. It is not good at all. You look at Brooklyn as punting. Atlanta, you can't tell me they got better. It's bad. Chicago got worse. There's a lot of messiness underneath this tier. So the good news is with Cleveland is, that's the number one thing when people come up to me and they're frustrated because the Cavs didn't do anything, right? The Cavs basically did what I do in a fantasy football draft. Ideally, you get the best players at every position, right? All right, I'm going to take a stud running back in round one. I'm going to get stud wide receiver in round 2. And ideally, but positionally that starts filling out quarterback, tight end, whatever. The Cavs don't have that. So when I do my drafts, I'm going to take the best player available instead of like reaching for, a tight end that it doesn't look that good. I'm going to take the stud wide receiver. So what they did was they doubled down on their strengths. They extended all of their guys and they set themselves up for later moves, which is what I do in fantasy football. And I won a league last year. So,
well, congratulations on all your success, Greg.
Thank you. Obviously luck, but the point I'm trying to make is I get the Cavs fans are frustrated that they didn't do a lot, but they also did the best they could with what they had. And they set themselves up to be flexible. They increased the value of their own players by extending them on good contracts, and they can make moves if they want to going forward. So I think they are the best of the next tier. I put them above Orlando. I know Orlando's really good. Orlando, I still think needs a premier point guard, someone to generate offense. And when your star player, Paolo Banchero, comes out and says, I don't want to be a playmaker. I want to be somebody we can run the offense through, but I don't want to do it. And you're going to go in the season with Jalen Suggs as your starting point guard because KCP is your starting 2 guard. And he's a very good player, great defender. He averaged like 3 assists a game last year. Like, to me, that is the perfect landing spot for a Trae Young, a LaMelo Ball, even a Darius Garland. I don't want to trade Darius Garland to Magic, but I'm saying he'd be a perfect fit. So
he would be.
As good as Orlando is defensively, I still have a lot of questions about their offensive generation and their ability to get other people buckets. Miami, I think they're going to have the Jimmy Butler situation hanging over the head all year. Is he going to go into free agency? Is he going to pick up the player option? He didn't get his extension. Again, they don't have a true point guard. They struck out on Damian Lillard. They tried to fill his shoes with Terry Rozier. I'm not a big Terry Rozier fan. And then Indiana, when they had their 2 studs last year, when they had Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam, in 36 games they went 20-16. They were fine, and they'll get Benedict Mathurin back. They got Andrew Nembhard. They're a good team. I just don't think they're a great team. And if you're looking at tiers, the Cavs are at the top of the tier. And I know you put the Cavs in the tier above. I think they could get there. But I think clearly the Cavs are a tier above all those other teams that I just mentioned.
So I think this is smart. And I guess the reason why I bumped the Cavs up instead of having them where you have them, because I think for the most part, we can maybe pick nits a little bit with the order of the teams. But I think for the most part, we've got the teams in the same order. But I do want to talk about why I think that they're closer to Milwaukee, Philly, and New York than they are 2 teams in particular that you have in that 3rd tier. I'm going to do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show also brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard me talk about FanDuel a ton here on Locked On Cavs, and for good reason. It is America's #1 sportsbook. I was on FanDuel this weekend as the first Sunday of the NFL year came and went. Didn't go so well for my Cleveland Browns, but I was able to watch a ton of other games on NFL Sunday Ticket, which made my Sunday just a little bit better. And now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket, thanks to YouTube and YouTube TV. So maybe if you're a Browns fan like me, you can make your Sundays a little bit better just by betting $5 with FanDuel and getting that 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, of course, with a YouTube TV base plan, you will be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. This week, there are a lot of good games on the NFL docket. Cleveland taking on Jacksonville. Cleveland, I believe, opened up as 3.5-point underdogs on FanDuel. May have dropped down to 3 by the time you're listening to this. Don't necessarily feel great about the Deshaun Watson situation. That guy playing quarterback. Don't love it. Hasn't looked very good. Maybe he will look better this upcoming Sunday than he did week 1 against the Dallas Cowboys. One can only hope, but I've got my doubts. But thanks to NFL Sunday Ticket, if it doesn't go well, I can watch any other game that's happening, and you can do the same just by betting $5 with FanDuel and getting a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook today. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. And Greg, you had the Cavs in Tier 3 of the Eastern Conference alongside the Magic, the Pacers, and the Miami Heat. So the Magic, I think, are actually pretty close to the Cavs. And I actually thought about putting them in that second tier. I like what they did a lot this offseason. I think Paolo Banchero is going to be a star that is just going to keep getting better and better and better. And I suspect he will at some point be making all NBA teams and maybe even receiving MVP votes at a certain point in his career. But where I start to just think, okay, are the Cavs closer to Milwaukee or are they closer to Miami and Indiana? Because I view Indiana a lot like that 2021 Atlanta Hawks team that made a run to the conference finals where they beat the Knicks in the first round and the Knicks were very clearly not ready for the moment. And then they beat Philadelphia in the second round with Joel Embiid, I believe, had a facial fracture or something. He had some sort of injury. Ben Simmons was scared to take layups. And that's kind of how the Atlanta Hawks advanced onto the conference finals where they were then promptly dismissed. I think the Pacers kind of mirror that a little bit. And then I don't see it with Miami anymore. Jimmy Butler's awesome, but that situation you mentioned is going to be a tricky one for them to navigate. And I just don't think the rest of that roster is all that good. I think that we are thinking of Miami as the 8 seed that made it to the finals a few years ago. And I just don't think they're that team anymore. So I think the Cavs are closer to Milwaukee than those two teams. That's sort of why I bumped them up a tier from you.
Yeah, that's fair. Like I said, I'm just not a big Miami Heat guy right now. I just don't think they've cared about the regular season.
You don't believe in the culture, Greg? You don't believe in Heat culture? Is that what I'm hearing from you, that Heat culture is a sham?
I didn't say a sham. They made Dion Waiters look pretty nice for a little bit. So I'm going to say it's a sham. But
Dion Waiters made Dion Waiters look nice.
Oh, yeah. And Kevin Love's, he's been nice down there. He's kind of had a nice, end of his career. So I'm not going to say it's a complete sham. And I think Bam Adebayo is, amazing. Obviously, he was shooting threes in the Olympics, so we'll see how that works out. But
yeah.
I'm not going to argue with you that the Cavs don't deserve to be in tier 2. They definitely could be. I'm just saying, I think if all of these teams are healthy and all of them are reaching their potential, I would still put those teams ahead. But when you factor in injury, yeah, I get it. The Cavs could be right there just because all those other teams have question marks ahead of them.
Yeah, and then as you move on, you mentioned the bottom of the Eastern Conference.
Ugh.
And it's bad.
It's
Brooklyn does not want to win. Atlanta is rudderless right now. Charlotte, I think, is probably a year away from being a play-in team. Toronto could be the 10 seed because somebody has to be the 10 seed. Chicago is probably going to be better than they should be, but they'll still be bad. It's just a mess at the bottom of the conference. I don't know if all those teams belong in the same tier, but I also don't care about any of them because I think they all stink to different degrees.
Oh, I put them in tiers. I got 2 tiers down at the bottom. My kind of interesting tier is the Raptors because they got some nice pieces. I like that.
They do.
I like Emmanuel quickly. I actually thought they got him on a good contract. $35 million a year is going to look actually pretty good coming up when guys are making $60 and $70 million.
Which is insane to say out loud.
Oh, yeah, it is. If you look at some of the projections, Luke is going to be making 80. Anthony Edwards, oh my gosh. We're going to see $100 million players.
Yeah, there's going to be a $100 million a year player in the next 10 years. It'll probably be Luka Doncic when he signs that third or fourth contract. He's probably going to make $100 million a year.
Yes, Tim and Edwards are going to be making bank. I got the Raptors in the kind of interesting tier, the Hawks, and then I put the Hornets, but I put an asterisk because it's only if LaMelo's healthy, and LaMelo has not been healthy. But if he's healthy, he's one of my favorite players to watch. And then you mix in Brandon Miller. Mark Williams, he was hurt last year too, but he's a good center. I think they're an interesting team, but I don't think they're going to be a playoff team. And then the bottom of the East, it's going to be rough watching the Wizards this year, man. What the heck,
I forgot about them.
What the heck are you watching the Wizards for? Jordan Poole, Kyle Kuzma, I mean, Tyus Jones was like the best part of watching them, and he's gone. I mean, Malcolm Brogdon got sent there to die, and they haven't moved on from him yet. They haven't traded him to a contender. I feel so bad for him.
I'm happy Tyus Jones got out of there. I'm glad Tyus Jones is in a good situation for him now, because Washington was just not it.
He had to take the minimum.
I know.
You take a minimum just to get the heck out of there. And Chicago, I mean, geez, they can't give Zach LaVine away. They've tried everything. And I actually like Josh Giddey, and I didn't hate that trade with Caruso, because I think Giddey, if you put the ball in his hands all the time, he had a really good Olympics for Team Australia. He's a great passer. He's 6'8". I think even if he becomes an average 3-point shooter and you can put shooters around him, I think he's going to be a really good player. I just don't think
stunned.
Chicago overall is going to be very good.
I was just stunned they didn't get a pick in that deal too.
Yeah.
Like, I was stunned that it was just Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey straight up. Like, that to me was one of the more jarring things of this offseason, that Chicago could not finagle a single, of which OKC has a million of. They could not finagle a single first-round pick out of that.
Oh, OKC, they didn't give up any of their picks this year. Like,
I know,
they got 1,000,
unbelievable.
And they didn't give up any. Like, they're just so well set up. It's them and San Antonio. And I know we're getting off track, but the Thunder and the Spurs are like the two teams that I'm like, boy, and these guys are going to be awesome for like the next 10 or 15 years. They're just so well set up and so well managed.
Yeah, they absolutely are. Glad those teams are out west. I definitely think that the West, this exercise is a little bit more difficult in the West than it is the East. But I do think we can agree the Cavs are at least in a solid spot. Like you. I think they're going to have a much better year in terms of the injury luck. I know we can't necessarily predict that with concrete evidence, but just it felt like so many things that could go wrong last year did, and I just don't think that's going to be the case again this year.
No, I think this is still a core that's young, that's still getting better. And I just have to believe that Darius Garland is going to show a lot of growth if he's healthy this year. He had a bad year last year, and I think, he's one of the guys that if he's healthy, I think it's going to make a world of a difference for the Cavs.
I could not agree more. I'm buying all the stock I can in Darius Garland. Last year was a nightmare for him. I think he's going to maybe not be an all-star, because it's really difficult to have two guys at essentially the same position on the all-star team, because Donovan Mitchell is a bona fide superstar in my opinion. But I'm buying stock in Darius Garland. I think he's going to be really good, and he's because I'm buying the bounce back from him. That's one of the reasons I'm confident in having the Cavs where I have the Cavs at as far as the standings go. But Greg, thank you so much for doing this. Where can everyone find everything that you do?
Yeah, check out BleacherReport.com. Getting ready to enter my 15th NBA season there. So looking forward to that, and check out all the great content we've got going into training camp. It's going to be starting up pretty soon. 15
seasons, that Greg, that means you're old. So check him out at Bleacher Report.
Trust me, I know. My kids tell me that all the time.
Well, they're right. You can find him on Twitter at Greg Swartz BR. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Check us out anywhere you get your podcast. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple, Spotify, everywhere else that you listen. Also, check us out on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and the notification bell on YouTube. And thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day.